All right, so let's take a quick look at our document. Our scene starts in a doctor's office. Our main character is a psychologist, and when we look at what our game mechanic is, which really the over umbrella game mechanic is a puzzle, right? And the very first step in our type of puzzle is picking up objects, assembling them to build the narrative. So you want to, if you think about it in the way that this sort of the Super Mario game mechanic methodology is, you want to think about it as like, what is the most common denominator of that mechanic, the overlapping mechanic, and polish that. So, for example, with Super Mario Brothers, I would ask my students like, "Oh, well, what's the primary game mechanic in Super Mario Brothers?" And they're like, "Oh, to save the princess." And that's actually the narrative. The primary mechanic is to defy gravity. So you'll notice like Mario will run and jump as he starts the game. That's how he collects objects. That's how he kills enemies. And then through subsequent other mechanics or upgrades, for example, the raccoon suit, he can fly. So there's a couple things we want to do. We want to say, well, what is the start, middle, and end to our mechanic? Well, the start of a mechanic is we want to be able to pick something up. The middle is it appears on screen, so the player has time to process what they're picking up. And the end is we need to use it or get rid of it. So for us, it's just going to return to where the player found it. So let's go back to our Unity scene. And let's take a look at how we can implement a highlighting, an animating, and then adding a sound to the picking up of a passport object, which is our first introduction to our game mechanic. So here we are back in our scene. And what I want to do is just lay out 3 or 4 elements in our scene that's going to satisfy the placement of our mechanic. So I always tell people, designers, artists, whatever, pick a reference that you like. It doesn't mean you have to put everything from the reference in there, but if you like the shape of this, you can always change the tone and mood through lighting and texture, but use this as the primary mechanic. So what I'm going to say is, okay, the very beginning of my game, you'll see our main character sitting at this desk. So let's go ahead and block that in. So new shape here, I'm just going to grab a cube and I'm going to hit build. And you can see it appears in our scene. And for this, I want to close this out and I'm going to center pivot on my Pro Builder object here. And I'm going to place it roughly here. Now, ordinarily, I'd create all the walls and the other good stuff, but for now, I'm jumping between each one, right? So I'm not necessarily focusing just on the mechanic, or I'm sorry, not just focusing on modeling, but I'm focusing on everything. So let's go ahead and move our character here. And so does that, if he's standing up, look like generally what a desk would be? Now remember, our character here is roughly 1.5 meters was our halfway point. We have like a 2 meter box here. So we are going to adjust the actual desk elements because the first thing we're really going to model is a generic character. All right, so here's our desk where we stand out. And actually, I'm going to load this up into PureRef. So I don't know if you guys remember, if you just go to pureref.com, and I'll see if I can link the video to where you can get this. This is fantastic because if you right click on it and you go to mode and you have always on top, what you can do is you can drag in reference images and you can save it. So back into our scene here, if I right click show and explorer, I can just drag this in here and now I always have that reference. And if you left click, you can pan around, you can zoom in with your wheel. So you can see there's a desk here. Now I can close this and I can close out all these other reference images I have. Let's expand this out a little bit. I'm going to place this by right clicking and just sort of moving that right here. So I have my desk here. And I like to actually just hit Control D and duplicate certain elements in my scene just to play with the placement. So let's place this here. And for me, I'm going to actually use the exact same camera as my, is this view here. And maybe I'll change it later. So there's the chair for where the psychologist or the patient sits. Let's duplicate this one more time. And let's move it here. And this is going to be the doctor's chair where he speaks to the patient, sort of does his or her analysis. So that's here. But for me, I want to make the character a little bit, maybe look like me, think like me a little bit, not too much. So if there's something there that you find weird, if you decide to end up playing this game, you will, no judgment on me. So here's this, here's our chair, and these elements can all be moved around, and that's the simplicity behind it. Now, here, I'm thinking that the passport will just be sitting on the table here, or maybe it could be sitting in this bookshelf. But for now, just so we can accelerate things, I'm going to duplicate this and then just place it sort of in the foreground. And let's move this down. Now, for me, I think my game is going to be about probably 16:9 aspect ratio. And so with my main camera selected, I'm going to go ahead and reset like all of these elements like that. And I'm going to move it up and sort of just position it so that it matches this. Now, like I mentioned before, this doesn't necessarily mean, let's rotate this 90. I'm going to lock this down as my final thing, but we're just prototyping at this stage. And if you decide to make any particular element of this concrete, like you overly model the texture of the couch, you're really wasting time. Because at this stage in our game, we want to get a good feeling or see what the feeling invokes. Like you actually, right when you get this down, you should be asking people to just play test even this movement. Like, like, does this feel right? Like when I click here, now my movement system is sort of screwed up because I forgot, we also need to, if you remember our navigation here, we need to bake out these elements. So our cube is getting a little confused. So let's go ahead and hit bake again. And hopefully these guys are marked static. Let's see, probably not. Okay, so let's mark all of these elements static. There we go. Let's rebake this out. There we go. Now, it shouldn't necessarily get confused when I click play, but it might. So let's see. Is he off the ground? What's going on with this guy? All right, let's see here. Inspector. Let's hit F to focus on this guy here, and let's see what's going on with our mesh collider. It looks like, here's our PC here. This has a collider, which I'm going to remove component here, and then our PC here has a mesh collider with our nav mesh agent. Let's see what's going on with our nav mesh agent. For some reason our cube, there's a little bit of some weirdness going on with this cube. So I'm actually going to pause it, and well, here I'll just show you how I'm going to do it. This cube here really should have our nav mesh agent on it. So add component, nav mesh agent. And it should also have this script. So one way to do this is you can just right click on the script here if yours didn't get screwed up like mine did through when I was transferring those elements. So I'm going to paste component as new. And let's see how this nav mesh agent actually looks. Not too bad. It's just slightly off. So if I make this 1, and let's see, if I make this 1 on the Z, and let's make sure numlock is on. Oh, it's just let's actually move this guy then into our nav mesh agent. There we go. That should fix our problem. All right, so these little issues kind of come up, but like I was saying, this isn't going to be our final by any means. We have our click and move, and I believe we need a rigid body. And I'm going to turn on is kinematic here. And let's delete this other one out. Now, hopefully, if I click around, it should move. Looks like there's still some issues with this nav mesh agent popping. Let's see what's going on when I press play. Oh, it's too tall. Okay, let's fix that. So it's actually going through our floor, which is interesting. And I might, if this nav mesh agent here, let's see, I might just add a fresh one. Let's see, nav mesh agent, base offset, there's 1. Okay, let's do 0. So there it's no longer offset, so we can adjust the height here, see what 1 gives us. Let's do height of 2. Now we should be okay. Yeah, so that offset, I guess by default. So we're here a little bit. We need to adjust the height, but you can see now I can click and move around. Now I'm going to, on this surface, be able to click on this passport, and I want to be able to show that it's selectable. So I'm actually going to just, for now, let's go ahead and close this. It's sort of in my way, and I do want to save this. and I'm going to save this in my project folder. So documents, and actually, here's another good thing to introduce a trick. What I like to do is, and it muddies up my desktop sometimes, is if I know I'm always going to be going to this folder and working, I'll right click on the art folder and go show in Explorer. And then I'll right click on this art folder and go to send to desktop, create shortcut. And now when I go to close this and it prompts me to save, I can actually just go to my desktop. You can see now I have an extension to my art folder. And in my gray box doctor office ref, I can actually save my pure ref. So I'll just do doctor's office here and hit save. And now it's in there. All right, so back to our setup here. I'm going to select this, Control D, scale this down by hitting R. Now, what I'd like to do is, say my passport is more of a brownish color. One way to sort of do this is if I select all the verts on this, and I want to make sure, remember, if you don't have this on, where it says select hidden, if you click this, you'll notice, let's do that, I didn't grab the other ones. See that? It missed that one. But if you have this set to on, where you can select hidden, you notice it selects all of them. Now I can go to vertex colors, and just for now as a placeholder, I can apply some color. So maybe an orange here. And that gave me sort of this dark orange object. And I'll place this on this table here. I'm going to save this on my scene. Now let's think about, well, when we're thinking about coding something like a selection system or whatever, we want to think about breaking them into the smallest possible components. So inside of our scripts folder, what I like to do is make a folder inside of here just called interactable. So I'm going to create a folder called interaction or interactable. And these are all the scripts that have to do with interaction in my scene. And so in here, I'm going to create a new C# script and call it selection and then highlighting. And let's save it for now. And then because this video ran a little bit longer, we're going to jump into the next video and we'll start coding our selection highlighting system.